the Dominion was absolute. For centuries, it had ruled the galaxy with an iron grip, its vast fleets patrolling the void, ensuring that no species dared to rise against it. What had started as a small coalition of worlds had, through conquest and assimilation, become an empire spanning thousands of systems. Lesser civilizations had learned to either kneel or perish. The Dominion did not tolerate defiance. And yet, among the conquered and the broken, a whisper persisted. It was not spoken in the halls of power, nor in the military war rooms of the Dominion. It was murmured in the deep space colonies, in the backrooms of smuggler dens, in the songs of traders who traveled the galactic fringes. A story so old, so forbidden, that even the Dominion's relentless purging of history could not erase it entirely. A story of a species that had once defied the stars themselves, humans. But humans were a myth. No records remained of their homeworld. No ruins bore their name. If they had ever existed, they were long gone, erased so thoroughly that even the oldest Dominion archives contained only fragmentary accounts, most dismissed as exaggeration or legend. Some spoke of a war where humanity had faced the early Dominion in a battle so brutal that neither side had emerged unscathed. The story claimed that humanity had been exterminated, burned from the cosmos by a force too powerful even for them. Others believed they had vanished by their own hand. Perhaps fleeing beyond the galactic rim, perhaps consumed by their own ambition. A race of conquerors who had reached too far, only to fade into oblivion. But one thing remained certain: humanity was gone. At least, that was what the Dominion believed. Then, the silence of the cosmos was broken. The first reports were barely noticed. A small listening post on the edge of Dominion space had gone silent. Its last transmission had been routine, nothing more than a status update. When a scouting ship was sent to investigate, it found only debris, twisted metal and shattered remnants of what had once been a station. No bodies, no distress signals, no signs of battle. The Dominion's ruling council dismissed it as an accident, a reactor failure perhaps, a minor loss, barely worth notice. But then it happened again. A colony world in the Karsus sector, home to nearly 50 million Dominion citizens, went silent. No warning, no evacuation signals. Just an entire world, gone. This time they sent warships, a fleet of 20 Dominion battlecruisers, accompanied by scout vessels and supply ships. These were not mere patrols but military-grade vessels, designed to crush insurrections and impose order. They never returned. By now the Dominion High Command was alarmed. Fleets did not simply vanish. Not in their empire. Admiral Korvax was chosen to lead the response. He was a warrior of the old ways, brutal, efficient, and utterly without mercy. He had crushed entire planetary uprisings, reduced civilizations to ashes, and ensured the Dominion's continued dominance for decades. If anyone could restore order, it was him. His fleet was formidable. 60 warships, armed with the most advanced weapons the Dominion had ever forged. His orders were clear: enter the Karsus sector, assess the situation, and eradicate whatever threat had dared to challenge the Dominion. As his fleet arrived at the edge of the sector, all seemed normal. The stars gleamed against the vastness of space, the distant nebulae casting a ghostly glow over the void. But something was wrong. There were no distress signals. No wreckage, no sign that a battle had ever occurred. Then the sensors detected something. A fleet. It was waiting for them. Korvax stood on the bridge of his flagship, his mandibles tightening in irritation as he gazed at the holographic display. The unknown vessels were unlike anything in Dominion records. Sleek, black. They floated like shadows against the cosmic abyss, their dark hulls absorbing the surrounding light, making them almost impossible to track. They were smaller than Dominion warships, yet something about them felt wrong. There was no grand formation, no visible fleet command structure, and yet they moved with eerie precision, each vessel shifting in concert, as if they were of a singular, unseen mind. Then, a transmission came through. Not a hail, not an introduction, just a single chilling message. This is human territory. Withdraw. For the first time in his long career, Korvax hesitated. He could feel the tension on his bridge, his officers glancing at him, awaiting his command. Humans? Impossible. The Dominion had eradicated them. The archives had said so. The elders had said so. The stories were just that. Stories. This had to be a deception. Some rebel faction using the name of a long-dead species to instill fear. Korvax sneered. "Fire, on the nearest vessel," he commanded. "Show them who rules these stars." The Dominion fleet unleashed its fury. Columns of plasma streaked through the void. Railgun slugs the size of buildings shattered the silence, racing toward their targets. Missiles left behind glowing trails as they locked onto the mysterious fleet, and yet, nothing hit. The human ships moved. One moment they were locked in targeting scanners, the next they were gone. Not jumping to warp, not using known stealth technology. Just disappearing. Dominion officers scrambled to adjust. Targeting arrays flickered. Sensors struggled to keep up. Then, the counterattack came. The human fleet did not engage in battle. They hunted. They struck from the darkness. Precision weaponry cutting through Dominion shields like they were made of paper. Ships that attempted to return fire found their systems hacked, overridden, blinded. One by one, the Dominion warships fell. Not in a chaotic, desperate firefight, but in silence. Korvax watched in mounting horror as his battlecruisers, some of the finest ships in the Dominion, were reduced to burning wreckage within minutes. How? How was this possible? His officers were shouting. Panic had taken the bridge. The Dominion never lost, and yet, here they were, being dismantled like prey. As the flames consumed his fleet, Admiral Korvax stood frozen. His mind screamed for an answer, for something to explain what was happening. It couldn't be them. It couldn't. But as his own ship was torn apart, his final transmission carried across the void, a desperate whisper into the abyss. They were real. They were always real. His flagship detonated, vanishing into nothingness. The few survivors, drifting in shattered escape pods, could only watch as the human fleet melted back into the darkness. No salvage, no prisoners, only silence. Then, the survivors heard the final message. Not a threat, not a declaration of war, just a warning. We have returned. The myths had awakened, and the stars would never be the same. The Dominion reeled from the disaster. Entire sectors were thrown into chaos as news of the fleet's annihilation spread. No official statement was released. High Command suppressed all information, sealing records and silencing witnesses. But rumors traveled faster than any warship. The idea of Dominion fleets vanishing without explanation was unthinkable. It had never happened before. Fear took root. In the corridors of power, admirals and warlords whispered among themselves, debating the impossible. Who had done this? The idea that the perpetrators were humans was absurd. No one truly believed it, not at first. And yet, there were the messages. We have returned. The words echoed through intercepted transmissions, across the Dominion's encrypted channels, mocking their confusion. The Dominion had faced many enemies, but none had ever been so brazen. Something had to be done. A retaliation force was assembled, 3 times the size of the one lost in the Karsus sector. 180 warships, enough firepower to scour entire planets. Their mission was simple: hunt down the ghosts that had dared to defy the Dominion and erase them from existence. They would not make the same mistake twice. Scouts spread out across the sector, scanning for any trace of the enemy. Dominion ships moved in coordinated formations, covering every angle, ensuring no blind spots. Defensive measures were enhanced, anti-stealth protocols activated, electronic countermeasures reinforced. No unknown fleet, no matter how elusive, would escape them this time. Weeks passed. Nothing. The humans did not engage. No further attacks came. It was as if they had simply vanished once more. But the Dominion knew better now. This was no accident. The silence was deliberate. It was a message. They were being watched. Then, without warning, a signal was detected. Faint, distant, and unmistakably alien. The Dominion warships converged on the source, engines burning as they pursued the ghost. It was a single vessel, unlike anything in Dominion records, drifting through space as if waiting to be found. A trap. They knew it, and still, they moved in. Weapons were armed, targeting arrays locked on. The order was given: fire at will. Energy beams lanced through the void. Plasma torpedoes shrieked across the darkness. Railguns thundered, sending rounds at near-light speed toward the lone vessel. And yet, not a single shot landed. The ship wasn't there. At least, not in the way the Dominion expected. It was real, its form visible, its outline unmistakable, but their weapons passed through it as if it were a shadow. Sensors flickered wildly, readings fluctuating between solid mass and empty space. The Dominion commanders hesitated. What were they fighting? Then, without warning, something moved. Not the single ship. The space around them. The distortion was subtle at first, a shimmer in the darkness, a ripple in the void. Then it expanded, engulfing the fleet. It was not a jump field, not a wormhole, not any known technology. It was something else. Ships convulsed as systems malfunctioned. Shields flickered again, then collapsed entirely. Weapons shut down. Engines sputtered. A force unlike anything they had encountered seized them, holding them in place. The Dominion commanders screamed into their comms, demanding answers. What was happening? And then, at last, the humans revealed themselves, not as a single vessel, as an armada. They emerged from the darkness without sound, without grand displays of power. They simply appeared, slipping through the void like predators, rising from deep waters. Their hulls absorbed the light around them, sleek and seamless, moving in perfect synchronization. Then came the transmission. You did not listen. The Dominion commanders tried to respond, to negotiate, to demand. No reply. Came only obliteration. The attack was unlike any battle the Dominion had fought before. There were no direct assaults, no drawn-out engagements. The human warships struck with precision. Their weapons were not the heavy, destructive cannons of Dominion fleets. These were scalpel-like instruments, slicing through critical systems, rendering ships useless before they could even fight back. The Dominion vessels did not explode in glorious fireballs. They failed. Engines went dark, weapon systems shorted out. Crews were left helpless, floating in dead ships as their enemies moved past them. It was not a war. It was a demonstration. When the battle was over 90% of the Dominion fleet was intact. Damaged, disabled, but not destroyed. They had not been wiped out. They had been humiliated. A single message was broadcast to the crippled fleet before the human warships vanished once more. You are trespassing. And then, as suddenly as they had arrived, they were gone. The survivors, those left adrift in the silence of space, would carry the message home. The Dominion had not just been challenged. It had been warned. The Dominion had never known fear. It had ruled for centuries, crushing rebellions, exterminating threats, and expanding relentlessly. It did not bargain. It did not retreat. It conquered. But now, something had changed. The defeat was undeniable. Twice now the humans had shattered their forces, and twice the Dominion had failed to strike back. The survivors of the engagement were not hailed as veterans, but as failures. They had been spared not out of mercy, but as messengers of humiliation, and that was unacceptable. The High Warlord of the Dominion, Karvok Thal, a being whose very name was synonymous with victory, had never before faced a foe beyond his understanding. His presence alone had commanded unwavering loyalty. His words dictated the course of wars. But this time, as he stood before the gathered admirals, strategists, and warlords of the Dominion's Supreme Council, he felt something he had never experienced before. Doubt. We do not negotiate with phantoms. His voice was a growl, deep and unwavering. His crimson eyes swept across the assembled leaders, demanding their attention. These creatures, these humans, are myths, old legends, nothing more. We are reality. We are power, and we will remind them of that. His words rang through the chamber, but the silence that followed was thick, heavy with unspoken fears. Finally, an admiral stepped forward. Her name was Varric Nal, one of the Dominion's most seasoned tacticians. They are more than myths. Now, High Warlord, they have weapons beyond our comprehension. They do not fight like any species we have ever faced. They do not seek conquest, and yet they strike as if they own these stars. Another warlord spoke, his voice bitter. They could have destroyed us, but they didn't. That means they want something. Whispers filled the chamber. The thought had occurred to all of them. Why had the humans not annihilated the Dominion fleets outright? Why had they left survivors? It was not mercy. It was control. They were choosing the terms of the engagement. They were forcing the Dominion into a position it had never been in before. A defensive one, but Karvok Thal would not allow that. Then we do what we have always done. We find them, we break them, and we erase them. He slammed his fist onto the war table. Holograms flared to life, displaying battle formations, planetary systems, and resource allocations. A full-scale offensive. The plan was simple, brutal, and absolute. Every available warship was to be deployed. Every sector where the humans had been sighted would be razed. If they wanted to remain shadows, the Dominion would set fire to the darkness itself. They would force the humans into the open. No more chasing ghosts. No more waiting. Karvok Thal's eyes burned with resolve. He would bring the full might of the Dominion down upon this unseen enemy, and he would end the legend of humanity before it could become a reality. The war machine of the Dominion awoke. 1,000 warships, the largest fleet ever assembled, launched from the Dominion's core worlds. Entire armadas spread out like a tidal wave across the stars, sweeping through every known system, hunting for any sign of the enemy. Planets suspected of harboring human activity were glassed. Moons were turned into rubble. If a single whisper of humanity was detected, the Dominion responded with fire. World after world, they pressed forward, deeper into the void, pushing into the unknown. And yet, there was nothing. No retaliation. No counterattack. No sign that the humans had even noticed. The silence became suffocating. The warships patrolled empty space, their crews growing restless, their weapons unused. How could they fight an enemy that refused to be seen? Then, the disappearances began. It started with isolated patrols. A scouting fleet would send out a routine transmission, and then nothing. No distress calls, no wreckage, just gone. At first, High Command dismissed it. Space was vast. Anomalies happened, but then entire battalions vanished. One by one, outposts stopped responding. Warships disappeared mid-patrol without a single sign of engagement. And still, the humans said nothing. Panic spread through the Dominion ranks. Soldiers whispered in fear. Officers began refusing certain assignments, dreading orders that sent them into the dark corners of space where ships never returned. Then, a single message came through. A Dominion warship, the Ardent Spear, appeared. At the edge of known space, drifting and lifeless, a salvage team was dispatched. What they found inside was not war. It was horror. The crew was gone. Not dead, just missing. Their weapons remained locked in place, their escape pods untouched. The ship's logs had been wiped, save for a single repeating transmission. A voice, human, calm, and cold. You wanted a war. Now you have one. The High Warlord received the report personally. He listened to the message, his claws digging into the armrest of his throne. The humans had not disappeared. They had been watching, waiting, preparing. And now, they were done. Waiting. War was no longer coming. It had already begun. The Dominion's grand fleet hung in the void, vast and imposing. Hundreds of warships drifted in formation, their hulls bristling with weaponry powerful enough to reduce entire planets to dust. They were the supreme enforcers of the Dominion's will, unchallenged for centuries. And yet, in the silence of deep space, a creeping sense of unease settled over every ship. No battles, no direct confrontations, only disappearances. Entire vessels were vanishing without explanation. No alarms, no distress signals, just silence. The Ardent Spear had been the first, but it was not the last. In the following days, 5 more ships had been found, adrift, untouched, and empty. Crews gone. Weapons powered down. Their systems wiped clean. It was psychological warfare. The Dominion was used to overwhelming its enemies, forcing them into submission through sheer force. But this was something else. It was a hunt. And for the first time, The Dominion was the prey. On the bridge of the Dominion battleship Imperious Wrath, Admiral Varric Nal stood motionless, her claws digging into the command console. Her crew awaited orders, but she had none to give. They were chasing ghosts. Their sensors detected nothing. No enemy ships, no warp trails. The humans did not exist, until they chose to strike. Her comm officer suddenly tensed. "Admiral, we just lost contact with the Dagger's Fang." Varric's eyes narrowed. That was 6 ships gone now, 6 warships of the Dominion, erased without a sound. She turned sharply. "What was their last known position?" The officer hesitated. "Sector 88 Gamma, near the outer asteroid field." Varric cursed under her breath. That was impossible. There was nothing there. The Dominion had already cleared the area. No fleets, no outposts. Just lifeless rock. Yet the pattern was undeniable. The humans were choosing their targets. No major flagships had been touched. No heavy battlecruisers had been taken. Instead, the humans were picking off the weaker ships, striking from the shadows, leaving the rest of the Dominion fleet paralyzed with uncertainty. Fear had begun to spread through the ranks. Soldiers whispered in the corridors. Warlords hesitated. This was not how wars were fought. The Dominion should have been able to see its enemy. But instead, the humans had rewritten the rules of engagement. Then, without warning, the silence was broken. A transmission came through. Live, unencrypted, a single human voice, emotionless, unwavering. "You invaded our stars. You sent your fleets, burned your worlds, declared yourselves conquerors. You were wrong." The transmission ended. Then the Dominion fleet's sensors lit up. Not just 1 or 2 ships, hundreds. The humans had never fled. They had never hidden. They had simply waited, and now they had arrived. The Dominion fleet scrambled into battle formation, officers barking. Orders, crews rushing to stations, targeting systems locked on, cannons swiveled, energy shields flared to life. Then, in an instant, the void erupted. The first wave of human warships dropped out of FTL in perfect formation, precise and surgical. They did not engage in direct combat. They did not exchange fire. Instead, they tore into the Dominion fleet systems. Viruses flooded communications. Power grids flickered and died. Ships lost propulsion. Automated defenses turned against their own crews. And then, the first explosions bloomed across the darkness. Dominion. Ships began detonating from the inside. It was sabotage. The humans had never needed to face them in open combat. They had been inside their systems the entire time. Admiral Varric Nal watched in horror as her fleet fell apart. Their weapons were useless. Their defenses compromised. Every countermeasure they deployed had already been accounted for. "How?" she snarled. "How did they do this?" Her tactical officer, pale with shock, whispered. "They were always here. They let us move deeper into space, but they never stopped watching us." Varric's eyes widened as she realized the truth. The humans had infiltrated the Dominion long before this war had even begun. Their stealth technology was beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. They hadn't just vanished. They had blended into the dark, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, and now they were dismantling the Dominion piece by piece. Across the battlefield, Dominion warships burned. The once invincible fleet, the pride of the Dominion, the instrument of their conquest, was being torn apart by an enemy that had never needed to match their numbers. The humans had no need for brute force. They were precision. They were strategy. They were vengeance. And in the span of a single battle, the balance of power in the galaxy had shifted. The Dominion had never feared the darkness. But now, as human warships moved unseen through the void, they learned why they should. The bridge of the Imperious Wrath was in chaos. Officers shouted over one another, screens flickered with static, and alarms blared through the ship. The mighty Dominion fleet, an armada of warships that had subjugated countless worlds, was unraveling before Admiral Varric Nal's eyes. She stood rigid, gripping the railing so hard her claws left deep grooves in the metal. How was this happening? Her fleet was superior in size, firepower, and numbers. Yet the humans fought with precision, using surgical strikes to dismantle them from within. Entire squadrons disappeared before they could even return fire. Ships self-destructed as human sabotage spread like wildfire through their systems. The sheer level of coordination and deception was beyond anything the Dominion had ever faced. This was not a war. This was a reckoning. Desperate transmission crackled through the Imperious Wrath's failing comms system. "Admiral, we're being overrun. The humans—" A sudden burst of static cut the officer off. The signal died. Varric clenched her jaw. That was another ship. Gone. Her tactical officer, eyes wide with disbelief, muttered, "They planned all of this." She turned to him sharply. "What do you mean?" The officer swallowed hard, his scales paling. "The humans. They allowed us to enter this region of space. They never retreated. They never ran. They lured us here." Varric's blood turned cold. If that was true, if the humans had orchestrated this entire battle from the very beginning, then the Dominion fleet had walked into a trap so vast, so intricate, that they had never even seen the walls closing in. She turned to her helmsman. "Full retreat." "Now." The helmsman hesitated. "Admiral, to where?" Varric opened her mouth to answer, but stopped, because the answer did not exist. There was nowhere to run. Across the vast battlefield, Dominion warships desperately tried to regroup. The fleet had come expecting total domination. Instead, they found themselves cut off, scattered, and blinded. Their ships were still powerful, but power meant nothing when the enemy knew every weakness. Dominion warships fired blindly into the darkness, launching plasma volleys and energy torpedoes in every direction. They hit nothing. Meanwhile, human warships moved like shadows through the void. Silent, invisible, deadly. Then, without warning, they struck. A Dominion battle cruiser, Gilded Reckoning, detected movement on its scanners. Too late. Before its gunners could react, 3 human ships decloaked directly beneath its hull. In the space of a heartbeat, a barrage of railgun rounds ripped through its armor, bypassing shields like they were nothing. Explosions blossomed across the cruiser's spine. Within seconds, the ship's reactor overloaded. The Gilded Reckoning exploded. The blast illuminated the battlefield, revealing the horror unfolding in every sector. More Dominion ships were falling. Stealth bomber squadron bypassed defenses and disabled entire command ships with targeted precision strikes. A human dreadnought, previously thought to be a myth, emerged from the void, its weaponry so advanced that Dominion shielding failed. Instantly upon impact, Dominion officers screamed into their comms, "Regroup! Defend the flagship! Where are they coming from? We can't detect them. Admiral Nal, we need orders." But there were no orders to give. Admiral Varric Nal had lost control of the battlefield. She knew that now. The Dominion had underestimated the humans. Gravely. This was not some primitive race barely grasping the basics of interstellar warfare. They had evolved. The stories, the myths of Earth, the legends of the long-lost species, had painted humans as relics of history, as ghosts of a civilization that had long vanished. But the truth was far more terrifying. The ghosts had returned, and they had come for vengeance. Varric had one last option: the Scorched Earth Protocol. It was a final contingency, a failsafe designed for extinction-level threats. If activated, the Imperious Wrath would release a planet-destroying payload, annihilating the sector. It would kill everything: the humans, the fleet, even her own ships. It was an act of desperation, but perhaps that was all they had left. She turned to her weapons officer. "Prepare the Scorched Earth warhead." The officer hesitated. "Admiral, that would wipe out half of our fleet." Varric's expression was stone. "If we don't use it, there won't be a fleet left to save." Deep within the ship, Dominion engineers scrambled to arm the warhead. The countdown began. 10 minutes until detonation. If the humans wanted to wipe out the Dominion fleet, they would pay the price in blood. Varric exhaled slowly, her fingers tightening. Around the control panel. If humanity had returned as legends, then she would burn those legends from the stars, or die trying. But the humans were already 3 steps ahead. As the countdown ticked away, a lone human operative silently moved through the Imperious Wrath's maintenance shafts. He had infiltrated the ship hours ago. His mission? to ensure that the Dominion's last gambit never came to pass. Deep within the Imperious Wrath, hidden among the maze of maintenance shafts, ducts, and access tunnels, Commander Elias Voss moved like a phantom. He was a shadow, a ghost of war, his every movement calculated, his breath measured, his mind locked onto a single objective: stopping the scorched Earth warhead. The mission had been clear from the start. Before the human fleet even engaged the Dominion, before the first shot was fired, before the trap had even begun to close, High Command had known the Dominion wouldn't go down without a final, desperate act. They had seen it before. Cornered, Dominion commanders always resorted to annihilation tactics. They preferred to erase entire battlefields rather than accept defeat. And so, Voss had been sent ahead. Long before the battle began, before the Dominion even realized the extent of the trap, he had already breached their flagship and embedded himself deep within their systems. And now, as alarms blared across the ship and the countdown ticked away, he was in position to strike. The corridors of the Imperious Wrath shook as explosions rocked the outer hull. Dominion crew members scrambled in every direction, desperate to repair failing systems, secure their wounded, and hold the line against an enemy they couldn't even see. Voss moved through the chaos undetected, his advanced optical camouflage suit bending light around his body. To the naked eye, he was invisible, little more than a ripple of distortion in the air. But he couldn't afford mistakes, because the scorched Earth warhead was not just a weapon, it was the Dominion's last breath. 9 minutes remaining. He reached the Central Security Hub, a heavily guarded checkpoint leading to the ship's primary weapons control room. 2 Dominion soldiers stood at the entrance, their reptilian forms clad in reinforced combat armor. They were on high alert, gripping their plasma rifles tightly, scanning the corridor for any sign of intrusion. Voss observed them for a few seconds. Killing them outright would be loud. He had to be silent, precise, ruthless. From beneath his cloak, he unleashed a microdrone. The tiny, insect-like machine buzzed through the air, moving so fast that it was no more than a whisper. It landed on the first guard's neck, injecting a paralytic agent directly into his bloodstream. The soldier stiffened, his body frozen in place. The second guard barely had time to react before Voss struck. A monoblade knife cut through the alien's throat in one fluid motion. Both guards fell without a sound. Voss stepped over them and accessed the security console. Inside the weapons control room, Dominion engineers frantically worked to arm the warhead. A massive cylindrical device, bristling with energy, sat at the center of the chamber, its core pulsing with an ominous red glow. It was a planet killer. Once deployed, the warhead would unleash a chain reaction of spatial distortions, consuming everything in a massive, inescapable implosion. There would be no survivors. 8 minutes remaining. Voss hacked into the control panel. Dominion encryption was complex, but human intelligence was better. They had studied Dominion coding structures, learned their weaknesses, exploited them. Within seconds, Voss had bypassed their security. He activated a looping data feed, making it appear as though the countdown was still active. But in reality, he had already disabled the warhead. The Scorched Earth protocol was now nothing more than a bluff. Back on the bridge, Admiral Varric Nall stood over the control panel, watching the countdown. 7 minutes. She allowed herself a grim smile. Humanity had fought well. Too well. They had outmaneuvered her, outflanked her, outwitted her at every turn. But they could not stop this. She turned to her officers. Prepare the final sequence. Let them watch as we take everything from them. Her weapons officer nodded and pressed the activation command. Nothing happened. A beat of silence, then another. Varric frowned. Execute the launch sequence, now. The officer tried again. Admiral, the system is unresponsive. Varric's eyes narrowed. What? The officer's hands flew across the console, his expression shifting from confusion to horror. The warhead is offline. It's been deactivated. Silence fell over the bridge. Varric's mind raced. The humans couldn't have gotten inside her ship. It was impossible. Wasn't it? And yet, somewhere deep inside her flagship, someone had done exactly that. A single human had undone her last hope for victory, and now she had nothing left. 6 minutes remaining. Voss moved fast. He had completed his mission, but now he had to escape. The ship's security systems had detected the breach. Dominion reinforcements were already flooding the lower decks, hunting for the intruder. Voss activated his comms. "This is Voss. Warhead neutralized. Extraction required," a voice crackled back. "Understood, Commander. Stand by." He raced through the corridors, avoiding enemy patrols, using every shadow and blind spot to his advantage. But the Dominion were relentless. A squad of elite shock troopers appeared at the far end of the hall, energy rifles raised, human detected. One of them snarled. Voss had no time for a fight. He reached into his belt and tossed a shock charge. A pulse of blue energy erupted, frying their targeting systems just long enough for him to vanish down a maintenance hatch. 5 minutes remaining. Above, the battle was ending. The Dominion fleet had crumbled. Their flagship was now an isolated fortress, cut off from reinforcements, surrounded by humanity's vengeful return. And soon, it would fall. Voss reached the extraction point, sealing the hatch behind him. A few seconds later, his comlink buzzed again. "Commander, we have you on scanners. Stand by for transport." He allowed himself a rare smirk. Mission complete. The Dominion had believed humans were just myths, remnants of a forgotten past. But today, that myth had become their nightmare. On the bridge, Admiral Varric Nal watched in silence as the last of her fleet burned. The warhead was disabled, her reinforcements were gone, and through the viewport, she saw the final horror. A human dreadnought, larger than anything she had ever encountered, descending upon them. The flagship trembled under its sheer presence. Humanity was no longer just a story. They were here, and they had come to end the Dominion. The imperious wrath, the last great fortress of the Dominion, trembled beneath the shadow of the human dreadnought. Its once unbreakable shields flickered, its mighty hull fractured and bleeding oxygen into the void. What had been a symbol of absolute power was now nothing more than a dying beast, awaiting its final breath. On the bridge, Admiral Varric Nal stood frozen, staring at the massive human warship. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. A towering colossus of steel and fury, bristling with weapons that defied logic, radiating the same terrifying energy that had once made the Dominion the most feared force in the galaxy. But now, the roles had reversed. Now, it was humanity that inspired terror. Across the Dominion flagship, officers and crew scrambled to salvage what little they could. Weapons were offline, engines were crippled. The scorched earth warhead, their final desperate hope, had been silenced by a single human infiltrator. There was no escape. Varric's command staff, once so arrogant and assured of their supremacy, now wore expressions of pure dread. One of her sub-commanders turned to her, his scales trembling. "Admiral," he stammered, "we must surrender. There is no—" Varric's clawed hand shot out, gripping the officer's throat in a vice-like grip. "Surrender?" she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "To them?" She gestured toward the looming dreadnought, its vast hull gleaming with the light of a resurgent empire. "To the species we cast into the abyss? To the ghosts we swore would never return? Her?" Grip tightened. "Never!" With a sickening crack, she snapped the officer's neck and let his body fall to the floor. The rest of the bridge crew stepped back in horror, but none dared to speak. They all knew the truth. The battle was over. But Admiral Varric Nal refused to accept defeat. She slammed her fist onto the communications panel. "This is the flagship Imperious Wrath to all remaining Dominion warships." "Static," she tried again. "This is Admiral Varric Nal. Respond." Silence. Her fleet was gone, her empire was broken, and now the humans had come for her. The human dreadnought hovered like a god of vengeance, its massive main cannons charging with an eerie, pulsating glow. Admiral Ryan Castor, commander of the human fleet, sat within the command throne of the HSS Retribution, his cold eyes fixed upon the dying Dominion flagship. For years, humanity had been seen as nothing more than a forgotten relic, a broken species, a scattered remnant of what once was. And now, here they stood, ascendant once more. "Target their engines," Castor commanded, his voice calm. A weapons officer nodded, locking onto the Imperious Wrath's exposed thrusters. A moment later, a spear of golden energy lanced from the Retribution's forward batteries. The impact was devastating. A massive explosion tore through the Dominion flagship, ripping entire decks apart, sending debris and bodies spiraling into the black void. Inside, crew members were vaporized instantly, the force of the blast tearing through the ship's fragile remains. Fires raged through the corridors. Gravity plating failed, sending Dominion officers floating helplessly as oxygen vented from the shattered hull. And yet, despite the destruction, Varric Nal stood firm. She refused to kneel. With trembling hands, Varric accessed the flagship's remaining systems. There was one last weapon left. Not a warhead, not a fleet, but the ship itself. With a snarl, she activated the final override command. The Imperious Wrath's engines ignited at full power, propelling the burning wreck directly toward the Retribution. If she was to die, she would take the humans with her. The remaining bridge crew screamed as the ship lurched forward, every last ounce of power surging into one final, desperate charge. On the human flagship, alarms blared. "Admiral," a tactical officer shouted, "the Dominion flagship is on a collision course." Ryan Castor's eyes narrowed. Varric Nal, the woman who had once ordered the genocide of humanity, the one who had declared them extinct centuries ago, was now willing to die just to kill one last human. But she would fail. Just as she had always failed. "Fire at will," Castor ordered. Aboard the Imperious Wrath, Varric Nal stood tall, staring through the viewport as her burning flagship raced toward the Retribution. This would be her final victory. Even if she fell, humanity would never forget the price they had paid today. Then, she saw it. The human warship's main gun, a colossal rail cannon charged with the full power of a dying star. She had mere seconds to react. Then, fire. A beam of pure annihilation erupted from the Retribution's main cannon. It tore through the Dominion flagship, slicing through its core like a blade through flesh. The ship's reactors detonated instantly, consuming the Imperious Wrath in a supernova of flames. Varric Nal had no time to scream. Her empire burned around her. Her legacy was reduced to ash, and as the fires consumed her, she realized the terrible truth. She had feared humanity's return. She had mocked them. She had sworn they were finished, but they had not been defeated. They had only been waiting, and now they ruled the stars once more. As the last wreckage of the Dominion's once mighty fleet drifted into the abyss, the human fleet stood victorious. A silence settled over the battlefield. The war that had begun centuries ago, when the Dominion had tried to wipe humanity from existence, was over. Humanity had returned, and they had won. Admiral Castor stood aboard the Retribution, staring at the burning debris. It was not just a victory, it was a message. To every empire in the galaxy, to every species that had doubted them. Humanity was back, and this time, they would never be forgotten again.